All right, Tom from Mark 7. We want to talk in this segment about the maintenance. And so going over the maintenance really involves a couple main things. One is the grease and the other one is the oil. And so we'll start with the greasing portion of it. Now what you're going to want to do is, if you are a commercial reloader and you are putting a lot of rounds on this every day, then at the end of the day is the perfect time for you to finish your session, take your shell plate off, please refer back to the shell plate video, and begin your maintenance at that time to clean the machine down. If you're not the commercial user, then I can tell you that a good round count to start with is after 10,000 rounds, you're going to want to remove the shell plate, clean everything off, and start your greasing session. At that point, if everything looks nice and clean still, then you can move that to 15,000 on your next interval. But typically in a commercial environment, this could be something that you're doing every single day to stay on top of the maintenance of the machine. And so starting from top to bottom, as far as our greasing points go, like I said, we have our shell plate location just on the inner edge of that, underneath and above in the shell plate where it contacts the nut and the wave spring. We're going to want to make sure that area is nice and clean, and then put a fresh layer of grease. The grease that we're using and that we recommend is a Lucas Red and Tacky. It might be referred to as Red and Tacky number 2. So avoid anything else like a number 3, for example. That is too thick. The things that we're going to use are going to be a simple syringe that you can get off the Amazon internet or anywhere like that at a store. If you have a grease gun with a sharp point nipple on it, that makes it much easier to perform the greasing on the bottom. And some might find that using a brush in a tub is easy as well for some of the various springs that we're going to put grease on. And so we'll start here. With the shell plate, we move on to the ram assembly. Now, taking the case feed assembly apart and going inside and cleaning and re-greasing the ram is something that you want to do on a regular basis to make sure that it doesn't stick on you and that it performs as intended. Moving down, we'll notice that we've got grease behind our rocker arm as well as on our primer punch spring. This is one of those locations that having a brush may be helpful to just go and put a little bit of brush on there. If we move over to our priming system, you'll notice that we have a couple of springs on our rotation guides, and I like to put a dab of grease on there as well on both sides. Now, any excess that I have in my hand, I will just wipe on the system itself and then remove any excess that I may have gotten. Now, coming down further, you're going to notice that we've got a main access grease point here, as well as one internal for the crank. And so this one on the front is very easy. We're going to insert and pump. And so about 2 to 3 squirts. If you look inside of the front of the case, you will actually see it come out, and that's the indication that I have enough. And then we can move over to the cam eccentric, which this same grease gun, without having a Zerk fitting, I can easily grease the eccentric. So that's for our swage. You can see the grease coming out. A couple of squirts. Plenty. Eventually you're going to want to remove the cover, which is very simple, wipe it off and have a nice fresh greasing. For us to access the crank joint, the easy way to do this is to go to our setup menu, hit move to bottom, and we're going to do that in just a moment. Go to our setup menu, press move to bottom, and now we're going to go back to our controls and jog up 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now if you look through this hole, it'll be lined up in the crank where I can take my same grease gun, go in that fitting, and again, a couple pumps. We're going to see it come out of the crank. Everything is lined up and we're ready to go. Now we can then cycle, and a couple of just various items. If I have a little excess grease, I'll go ahead and wipe down my guide pins on the tool head. Make sure those are lubricated just because they're making metal on metal contact, as well as the front of my case feed cam. And so that is a sealed roller billing in the bottom, but anywhere that metal is touching metal, it's advised to have a thin layer of grease. And so now we can move on to the oiling. And for starters, we're going to recommend a lightweight machine oil. In this case, it's a Starrett tool and instrument oil. It's again available anywhere, Amazon or most hardware stores. And we'll start from the top to bottom. So the simple explanation is that if you see a bronze bushing, it's going to require oiling. The time that you're going to be oiling is a visual indicator, not like the grease that we're doing at the end of the night or in a scheduled interval. We're doing this visually. If I look at my ram or my external guide rod, for example, and I see that it looks dry, then I'm going to simply put some oil around the face, let that soak down, and then I simply cycle the machine. like so. Now, alternatively, if I look and I see that it's very dirty, I'm going to go ahead and wipe that off before I put the oil on. So that way it stays clean and I keep it free from contaminants. Now, there's another spot on the side, which is the internal guide rod, which you'll need a 3/32 Allen to loosen the screws, which I've already done, so I can swing the window out of the way. Now again, you'll see a guide rod inside and a bushing, and we want to go to our menu and controls and jog down. What we're doing is we're putting the guide pin through the hole so that when I come in with the oil, it will evenly spread behind. We'll give that a moment to saturate around the guide rod, and then again, we'll hit our run feature. Now, I'm going to stress that this is a visual indicator, so throughout our day of loading, we're constantly keeping an eye on that and making sure that it stays oiled. So again, whether it's dirty and needs to be wiped and cleaned, or it just looks dry, you want to make sure that you're keeping it oiled at all times. I'll point out that in our internal guide rod, we have a very small weep hole in the bottom, so it's something that you can pay attention to, and you'll see it come out. And to give you an example, I'm going to put some oil in there without having the guide rod down, so you can see immediately it comes out of the bottom. And again, if I cycle the machine, you'll see the oil push out right away. And so that's my easy indicator that I've got oil in the system, and I'll wipe it off as needed. When I notice that that's running very dry, that's my clear indication that it's time to oil the internal guide rod. So I'll go back and reiterate. When it comes to the grease, that's going to be most of our metal on metal contact points, and we do that on a PM schedule. When we're talking about oiling, that's a visual indicator, and I'm doing that throughout the day in my loading sessions. A good time to take advantage of that would be if I were to have some kind of spillage, whether it be powder or something, I would go ahead and clean that off, and that's a good opportunity to put a fresh coat of oil. Alternatively, we can always fill most of these hoppers while the machine is running, except for the powder measure. So if I'm going through a complete hopper of powder and I had to stop the machine, that's again a good time to go ahead and put a light coat of oil on those.